Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard our second flight over my stories to tell. As I mentioned in the previous video, every story has a story embedded in it. So let's take off. In this video, I tell how the lightning can strike twice at the same place. My second souvenir is a key holder, not a simple key holder. As for me, it represents a big part of my life in the Pilots Association. In Brazil, unions are those recognized by the government, and they are generally nationwide and englobes the activities of all companies that have employees that fulfill a category, purpose of the union. The difference is that the association handles with specific case of the employees of a certain company and are not biased by the politics, national politics of the unions, besides of assisting directly in a more efficient way single individuals. Here, I would like to honor those colleagues that are no longer with us, and my participation in the Pilots Association is another story. The curiosity here is there's a position, waypoint in the navigational charts called UPVAR, the name of the Pilots Association, and it's in the Italian airspace, and there's one for Varig as well. And I'll talk about that when I talk about my participation in the association, and that's another story. This is how my almost 25,000 hours flying and another bunch in the simulator look like on paper. Problem with the logbooks is that every other country had its own format, and accept only their format for the registering of the flying hours of any given pilot. This could impede your progress because they are the proof of experience, which is fundamental for this progress. First book here is from the Aero Club, where I started the private pilot license, getting my first experience. Look at the other video for the airplanes I flew on this license. Second and third one are from the Varig Flight School, where I took a commercial license, multi-engine, and instrument flying certification. It lists all my flight experience, my hours flown in the Socata ST-10 Diplomat and the Piper Navajo PA-31. The brown one is the first one I made when I collected the hours and prepared this one. And I had to readapt for the electronic format and to go to Korea. The black one is the last one when I was flying in Qatar and shows my last flying hours, almost 25,000 at the end, with some of part of the documentation of the license that I held in that country. I put everything on an electronic format. I had to print. It's in this red folder till a certain time because the company has to sign the hours. The red folder was part of the documentation that I presented in Korea, and then after when I rejoined here in Italy. Here I stopped to show the first flight that I mentioned on the previous video, the one that I went to Lagos. The aircraft shown here is the Brazilian license, has 2 letters and a dash followed by 3 letters. That we use in aviation, we say Papa, Papa, Victor, Lima, uniform. Those who do not know, every aircraft has a unique registration in the country and is regulated by the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. For instance, Brazil has these 5 codes, starting with 2 letters, Papa, Papa, Papa Tango, Papa Romeo, Papa Sierra, Papa Uniform, dash and 3 letters. The United States have November, N, and combination with 3 numbers and letters. Italy has I, UK has G, Germany D, Netherlands Papa Hotel, and so on. Every country has its own unique code. And now to the story. This aircraft was on a scheduled cargo round trip from Brazil to Japan, And like the MH370, the Malaysian flight, it disappeared, never to be found or heard of, not a trace. At the time, many conspiracy theories came on, and all of them, as conspiracy theories, lack credibility until proven correct. But the fantasy of humankind is very big. And I would like to mention this as well as a disclaimer, as the official report does not mention any of those, and I support the official report of this flight and any other official reports of any accident or incident as a former airline safety manager. But the conspiracy theories came on anyway. Aboard the aircraft, along with other cargo, there was a collection of paintings from a Brazilian painter of Japanese descent. The collection was insured for a high sum of money, and here is the first unproven conspiracy. As there is no trace, I doubt that any insurance has been paid to him until his early death less than a year later. Another conspiracy was that, if you remember, there was a defection from the Soviet Union. A fighter pilot flew the then unseen aircraft, the MiG-25, and landed in Japan. This aircraft would have been dismantled and secretly disguised as general cargo and shipped on the Victor Lima uniform to the States. The most secret parts anyway, because I do not think the heavy jet dismantle would fly on the cargo plane without causing an overweight takeoff. Therefore, the Soviets would have shut down or otherwise the unfortunate Victor Lima uniform. And the third one was the usual firing of ballistic missiles in the West Pacific. Every other country thinks this vast region is a beautiful and perfect ground for testing every type of weapon. But this time was fired by the Soviets and not by the People's Republic of Korea. But it's another theory, conspiracy theory. The most likely scenario, though, is that the aircraft depressurized and the crew passed away due to hypoxia, and the airplane kept flying until fuel starvation and crashed into the unknown. And here comes the second story within the story. I showed you on the previous video this navigation equipment, Doppler, and this particular flight, it was used. And it comprised two flying legs and with a distance selected by the pilot with a heading. And when the miles get to zero, it jumps to the other leg. And in this case, the airplane, without a crew intervention, kept jumping from one leg to another as they are zero, and confusing the computer and the autopilot, and the aircraft kept flying on an unknown direction. And very difficult to find them. And the crash landed in the Pacific. And if you know, the Pacific is very deep at the time for a meaningful search. The system used 4 projected beams to the surface of the Earth, as I show here. The land of water and returns the movement of the aircraft laterally and longitudinally, computing the route. The principle is the Doppler effect, and I show here an example of sounds of an approaching vehicles that have a higher pitch when they are approaching and lower pitch as they go away from us. The wavelength is added to the movement. Atmospheric conditions as well as the type of surface impacts the correction and the results. It was based on starting on a known radio fix called outbound gate, and another one where an error could be seen and corrected. And this correction calculated for the next legs and apply to the other sectors. Here is the next element of this story within the story, and you'll understand why at the end. And have you seen this? Probably, if you have flown on an aircraft, the ashtray and the door of the toilets, and it's non-smoking, and it's forbidden to smoke on the toilets. And have you ever understood where this came from? Well, in 1973, 707 from Varig, flying from Rio to Paris, crash-landed into an onion field short of the Orly airport. because of a fire that started in the lavatory. Somebody smoked and put the cigarette in the trash bin, caused a fire and smoke that overwhelmed the passengers and the crew, part of the crew, at least. The pilot flying, which was the second captain, the crew was composed by 2 captains, 2 first officers, and 2 flight engineers. And the second captain was the one landing the aircraft. The smoke was so dense, he opened the window, put his head outside, and flew the airplane into an onion field because they realized that they would not reach the airfield. And they crash landed, expecting and the hope that the surviving passengers could exit the aircraft with the rest of the crew once they stopped. That was not the case. 11 people survived of this accident, mostly crew, and they were all in the flight deck. 11 people cramped in the small flight deck. If you've seen the picture on the 707 in my first video, you'll understand how cramped it was. Because of this accident, following this accident, the FAA, which is the American Aviation Authority, issued an airworthiness directive, it's called, number 740809, requiring installation of placards prohibiting smoke in the lavatory and disposal of cigarettes in the lavatory waste receptacles, establishing of a procedure to announce to airplanes occupants that smoking is prohibited in the lavatory, installation of ashtrays at a certain position on the aircraft. After the FAA directive, every other authority in the world follows suit. And you might be thinking at this point, what does the Victor Lima uniform has to do with all of this? Well, the captain of this flight was the same captain that disappeared in the Pacific, Captain Gilberto Araújo, God rest his soul. And if you're thinking of safety in flight, flight is the safest way to travel. And as we speak, all the international organizations guided by the ICAO are working hard to improve the safety with events like this one and with new technologies, with the interface that are put to the pilots, to the flight attendants, to the flight controllers, to manage the big number of flights, the increasing number of flights and people and cargo in the air at any given moment. Thank you for being with us to the end of this journey. See you in the next one, where I will talk about this technological progress that I mentioned here, and they are related with something I mentioned in the first video. Pilots need weather information, and why do they need space weather? This is the never-ending story within a story. Stay safe. Bye.